Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for coming. This is our Clean Energy DC stakeholder meeting. It's been a busy year for us. This March, we passed the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act, which is a major milestone. And so we just wanted to invite everyone in, give you an update on where we are now, and let you know what's going on. I also want to invite our colleagues who are joining us by phone on our webinar. This is being recorded, so if you want to go back and watch it later, or some of your colleagues couldn't make it, we'll post it online. But before I go any further, let me introduce you to our director, Director Wells, who has been spearheading all of this, to give a few remarks.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're doing this as a webinar, which is a little bit new for us, but we had 100 RSVPs right away, and the amount of interest in the work that we're doing with you guys is pretty high. So we're trying to figure out ways to be sure we can reach others instead of just those that can physically make it here. So excited that you're a part of this. We have a lot of moving parts going on around the city right now. I just came from the Green Bank board meeting, and their executive director position is open, and that will be the first employee for the Green Bank. It's open until January 10th, and so we know we're going to get the best candidates through networking. The best candidate may be in this room. I don't know. But so we're recruiting for the first Green Bank director. The Green Bank's board is up and functioning. They're about to secure space, so they're moving pretty quick. I know everybody watches all the press releases that come out related to our business, and yesterday's was about the high-performing building hub that we just awarded $400,000 to the high-performing building hub. The purpose of the building hub is to be sure that the development community and the building owner community have the technical expertise, the kind of a peer group, be able to do what you need to do to be able to participate in this transformation. Speaking of transformation, it's the Institute of Market Transformation.
Institute for Market Transformation.
For Market Transformation. Cliff is here. And
we just posted the job posting for the director of the hub as well.
So the director of the hub is a brand new position that just came up. So everything's moving quickly. And as many of you know, that this next year is the beginning, the first year of the decade, which is presumed to be the most important in 10 years, certainly in our lives, but possibly in humanity's lives, of how we're going to deal with climate change. And DC is on the front end, that we're leading around the country, and it's still not enough. But hopefully together we're going to make a big difference, and we're doing all that we can, not only just to transform DC to a net zero energy or net zero carbon city, but also we have a responsibility with lack of leadership in the federal government that the cities are leading each other. And so what we learn here, we share in real time with other cities across America. So thanks for being a part of this, part of our future. And Jamie, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, guys, we're just going to jump into this. Here's the agenda for today. It's going to focus mainly on Clean Energy DC, and that's the Clean Energy DC plan, which is our climate and energy strategy, and then also the Act, which codified some of those into law and provided funding. I'm going to invite a few people up to give presentations during that, and we're going to try to take questions after each speaker, a couple questions, and then at the end, there'll be time for discussion. If our timeline gets a little tight, we might push all the questions to the end, but we'll see how it goes. Then we'll give a brief overview on the carbon neutrality study or strategy. This is the city's plan to reduce its carbon emissions and be at or carbon neutral by 2050. So Clean Energy DC is 50% 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2032, and then the carbon neutrality study will take us the rest of the way over the next 18 years. And then finally, we'll have a discussion. We can't have this meeting every week, but there's a lot of ways for people to stay engaged on this. So what I would say, echoing our communications team, is follow us on social media, follow us on Twitter. We post everything on there. You can also go to our website, sign up for our newsletter. We send this out every month or so when things are relevant, and that's a good way to track all of our progress. We'll be having another meeting in the spring, a progress report on where we are with the Clean Energy DC Act implementation. And finally, if there's a topic you are very interested in or is very relevant to you, there's a lot of ways to stay engaged and be part of that conversation. So the BEPS Task Force will be meeting, I think, next week. That's a public meeting. You can join that. The Public Service Commission is meeting all the time on regulatory stuff. So there's plenty of ways to stay engaged. If you want help or want to know how, just let us know. We're happy to chat. So Clean Energy DC is the climate and energy strategy for the city. It's part of a broader framework known as Sustainable DC, which I think came out in around 2012, and that is how the city is going to meet all of its sustainability goals. Clean Energy DC is focused mainly on energy as it pertains to buildings, energy supply, and transportation. There's 57 action items in the plan. Now, work on it began in 2015. There was a lot of stakeholder outreach, consultations, figuring out what people wanted. It took about 2.5 to 3 years, and the mayor adopted it in August 2018. So this was a big accomplishment for the agency. It was a lot of work. It's a good plan. Right after that, the council started drafting what's known as the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Amendment Act of 2018. We refer to this often as the Act or the Clean Energy DC Act, so we don't have to say all those words. It was passed in March 2019, and now it's effective this fiscal year. So the funding comes, our targets start being real this year. Just for reference, the plan is about this thick, about 300 pages. The Act is about 10 pages and just really nails down on a few things, but a few very important things which we'll go over. This is broad level. The number one thing the plan focuses on, 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2032. It also calls for reduction in energy use by 50% and 100% electricity by 2032. Just so you know how we sort of got there, I think this is an important slide to show where we are and how we use energy and where our emissions come from. So these green ones and yellow ones are buildings. So about 75% of our emissions come from building energy use. Most of the remaining quarter is for transportation. If you look over to the graph on the left, you can then see the fuel type. So electricity is the biggest at about 50%, and then another quarter is natural gas for heating and other building uses. And then gas and diesel reflect the other, let's say, quarter from the transportation. So when we looked at that and we were doing the plan, we said, okay, what do we go after? And you can't necessarily see it here, but this is new construction, existing buildings, 20%. That's how we'll get 20% of our reductions. Less driving. When we do have to drive, be more fuel efficient, electric vehicles. And then finally, use clean energy for the things we need there. These are the 11 action items in the plan that get us to 50%. This column, which you can't see great right now, is how we're going after the savings. So Renewable Portfolio Standard is the greatest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. That was included in the Clean Energy DC plan that was just passed. The second greatest reductions, existing building policies. That was also addressed in the Clean Energy DC Act. And that's through the Building Energy Performance Standards. So there's other elements, but the Building Energy Performance Standards, which we'll go over, is the most important part of it. Everything, all 11 action items are being addressed one way or another right now. The majority in the Clean Energy DC Act, but the Public Service Commission is also looking at some. Move DC, which is our mode shift plan coming out of Department of Transportation, they're also looking at it too. So before we get into the Act, I just wanted to say equity is a very important aspect, making sure the policies that come out of this are fair to everyone. We want to make sure we're engaging everyone and getting feedback. We want to make sure everyone has access, whether it's access to funding, access to public transportation, access to electric vehicle chargers. And finally, we want to reduce the cost burden. Some of these actions can be expensive or at least have upfront costs. So, how do we address that? Is it through utility rebates? Is it through the Green Bank? Is it through Solar for All? We have a lot of tools. Now, buildings. As I said, 75% of our emission reductions are from buildings. So we address this in the plan in a number of ways. Most importantly, the Building Energy Performance Standard, which is the first of its kind program that sets a minimum energy performance level for public and private buildings. This is a really key initiative that Katie's going to talk about in a moment. We want to lead the way in our public buildings, and so Department of General Services is coming up with a strategic energy management plan. How do we address this at public buildings? And a lot of that will be working with local companies to do retrofits. I think there should be a lot of opportunity. I have these separate because this is going to help get here. The Act provides more funding for the Green Bank. The Green Bank right now just had their first board meeting, as Director Wells said. They're in the process of hiring a executive director over there, and they'll be providing finance to business and developers to help them meet BEPS and also the building codes. The High Performance Building Hub, I'll let Cliff talk about that a little if he wants, but that's going to provide best practices, case studies, technical assistance to buildings when they're trying to meet these things. They're also hiring an executive director right now. And lastly, there's some workforce programs, new funding going into certification programs, trying to create a pipeline of local workers that can help companies do the retrofits, do the things they need, operate buildings, work building automation systems, stuff like that. And finally, the building codes are a big deal. It's not addressed in the Act, but it's addressed through the code process. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with some of the net zero targets there, and we're going to talk about that. So let me invite our branch chief, Katie, up to talk a little bit about what's going on with the Building Energy Performance Standards.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Bergfeld. I'm the branch chief for the Building Performance and Enforcement branch here at DOEE. I work in the Energy Administration. And so the role of my branch is basically to manage two major programs here in the district. The district's energy benchmarking program, which is a reporting and disclosure law of energy and water consumption data for all of our large commercial buildings here in the district and our publicly owned buildings as well. And then my team is also standing up the Building Energy Performance Standard, which was established in the Clean Energy DC Act of 2018 that Jamie has talked about a lot already. So this is, as Jamie mentioned, one of the largest action items coming out of Clean Energy DC, and it is actually, we're also finding that not only out of the Clean Energy DC plan, but the carbon neutrality study that Jen will be talking about in a little bit, we're seeing that the acceleration of and the conglomeration of the building codes and VEPs are going to sort of create this sort of acceleration that'll get us to almost nearly carbon neutrality. Jen will explain it a little bit. So this program is a really big deal in terms of making sure that we get to our carbon neutrality goals. And basically what the law says is that DOE is going to set a minimum energy performance standard that buildings must achieve, and if they don't, they will be required to make retrofits or upgrades in their buildings to achieve a 20% energy reduction in their buildings over a 5-year period. This is a quick timeline of how that's going to be rolled out. It's going to apply to our largest buildings first, so buildings 50,000 square feet and above are going to be required to start meeting the energy performance standard starting January 1st, 2021. So that's this. Oh. This got all thrown off by the formatting. This is our benchmarking. I'm sorry. The wrong chart. Anyway, so it'll start applying to our buildings 50,000 square feet and above in 2021. It'll apply to our buildings 25,000 square feet and above starting in 2024, and then it'll apply to our buildings 10,000 square feet and above starting in 2026. So all those buildings will be on a 5-year compliance cycle, and they'll be required to make those energy reductions over that 5-year period. Then 5 years later, we will reset the standard. It will be higher. I'm saying that as a definitive statement. The standard will be higher, and buildings will be required to meet that performance standard. And if they don't, they will have to make those energy reductions, again, over that 5-year period. This one action item is modeled to, we did some preliminary analysis, it's modeled to show a nearly over 20% reduction in source energy use if everybody meets these standards, which they will. Nearly 19% of that is going to come from the largest buildings. So that first compliance cycle is going to be very, very critical to us meeting these goals, because that's when the largest buildings are going to be having to make those reductions. That's also equivalent to over 1 million tons of CO2 emissions that will be reduced by folks having to meet these energy performance standards. Buildings that don't meet those requirements will be facing penalties. So anybody who doesn't do their 20% reduction will be facing penalties. Those penalties have yet to be defined, but that's sort of the stick part of it, of where we'll be coming from on the enforcement side. We've had a lot of discussions about that in our working group meetings, which I'll talk about in a minute, and we'll be discussing those with the Building Energy Performance Standard task force as well. So that was a quick overview of the policy. This is sort of what we've been doing and where we're at right now. So we held some working group sessions over the summer. We held 5 working group sessions. They were heavily attended. We had nearly 60 to 70 people at every session. We completed them over the summer. Basically, all the topics ranged from how should we find people, how should we be setting the standard, what should, all these questions that we wanted to get public engagement on. We came away with many, many pages of takeaways from that. They're published on our website. You can get them here at our BEST website. We sent out scorecards for the first time this year. So usually folks report their data to us. We publicly disclose it on our website. And then in the past, we haven't done much feedback to building owners to kind of let them know how they're performing. This year we did that. We sent out performance scorecards to office, multifamily, and hotel owners in the district to tell them basically how they performed in terms of their calendar year 2018 benchmarking data, and then how they compared to their peers here in the district. If you are involved in property management or building ownership and you want to get a copy of the data for any scorecards, you can contact my team. Again, we have our website and our contact information up here. And then this third bullet here, we have a task force that is convening. We will be, they're all appointed by the mayor. It's 17 members on this task force, a mixture of private and public sector members. The first meeting will be starting next week. The goal of the task of the task force is basically to advise DOE on drafting of the rules. So we have the legislation in place, and now we need to write the rules, which will detail how the legislation will be implemented and enforced. So the task force job is to basically advise us on how to draft those rules and how to formulate them. The rules, we're looking to get them finalized in late 2020. So we'll be meeting with the task force. We'll be putting the rules out for public comment. So all of you should keep your eyes out probably next summer for the rules to be put out in draft form. At that point, they will be open for public comment, so anyone in this room can make comments on those rules, and we highly encourage that. We want to get as much feedback as possible before we start implementing this program. We'll also be announcing the first BEST standard next year, so at the end of December, or sometime in December of next year, we'll be releasing that first standard. And so we'll be releasing sort of what the energy performance standard will be, and then we'll be informing people in January of 2021 whether they fall below that standard and will be required to make those reductions. And then, as we said here, first compliance period will start January 1st, 2021. That was a lot that I just said, but we have a lot of work to do in the next year or so. Do you want me to pause for questions?
Yeah, we have time to take a few questions, yeah.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Do you know how many buildings are in each of the three categories?
Yeah, so currently in the 50,000 and above, there's about 2,000 covered. When we drop down to 25,000, we're adding about another 1,000 buildings. And then when we drop down to 10,000, we'll be adding another 2,000 to 3,000.
Can you speak to the square footage in each category?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
How many of the square footage, what percentage is the 50,000 and larger? What percentage is the 25 to?
Oh, percentage of square footage in the
total
district?
Square footage in the.
I don't know for the smaller buildings, but I know that the 50,000 square feet and above, it represents about 2% of the number of buildings in the district, but it represents nearly half of the square footage in the district. Is that what you're asking, Cliff? So with the largest set, the 50,000 plus, we're representing nearly half the square footage in the district. I'd have to look at the numbers for the other ones. I don't want to speak out of turn. Anybody else? Yes.
You said for 25,000 square feet, it'd be in 2024.
Is that what I
I
said?
think the bill says 2023.
Yes. Sorry about that. There's the benchmarking and the BEST changes that I sometimes get switched off in my brain. I apologize for that. So it's 2021 starting for the 50,000 square feet and above, 2023 for the, 2023 for the 25,000, and then 2026 for the 10. I apologize for that. Thank you for correcting me. Anybody else?
So is there any indication of what that standard may be? Like what sort of the line of thinking right now?
I forgot to mention that. So we also published the median Energy Star scores. So the law says that we must set the standard at least the local median Energy Star score per property type. For anyone who's not familiar with Energy Star, it's a program from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It gives nearly every building a score from 1 to 100 based on their efficiency. And so 1 being the worst, 100 being the best. And so we are basically going to take the data set of all the offices in the district, and we're going to say what is the median Energy Star score for all of those offices. And then we're going to say you have to either be above this or you're going to be required to do some reductions in your building. We just published the median based on the 2018 data on our website. You can find them here at the benchmarking website. So if you want to get an indication of where the median is now, then yes, you can see them on our website there. In terms of what it will be for 2019, we don't know until we get the data in April, and most likely the standard will be based on the 2019 data.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Hey, Katie, it's Mike up in the overflow room. We have a question for you.
Okay. We'll go ahead and say, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, okay.
I think you answered this, but you're going to base this on the new 2019 Energy Star scores that are lower than the old scores. Is that correct?
So,
Can you repeat that?
the question was, are we going to be setting the median based on the 2019 data, which will have lower Energy Star scores? The answer is yes. However, the 2018 data actually has the new EPA model. So for anyone who's not in the loop, EPA updated their model last year, and it caused a lot of the scores to drop, but it caused scores across the board to drop. They basically needed to do this update to sort of update all of the data that was going behind the calculation of the score, and it hadn't been updated since 2003. So now we're working off, I see everyone going, so now we're working off 2012 data, so kind of behind, but much better. So a lot of the scores drop. So if you are trying to look at a baseline of a building and you try to look from the 2017 data to the 2018 data, you're going to notice a big difference. So I would say that this is almost a restart year for us in terms of the scores. If you want to compare energy efficiency to a building over time, I would recommend that you look at its weather normalized site energy use intensity. That's sort of the energy that it consumes on site per square foot. That's sort of the best calculation for you to see if your efficiency is improving or not over time right now. Eventually, you will be able to use the score as a better, quick comparison.
I think we have time for one more question, and then if you have more questions, we'll move it to the end of the discussion.
Yes.
How do you see this evolving going forward after the first or maybe even the second cycle towards sort of longer-term reduction goals? I mean, in some ways, a good plan, isn't going to first do measure A that's good for a small gain and then undo some improvements for like a really substantial update later on. How are people getting some guidance on whether, once they do maybe a little bit more than the required path, they're doing okay and just not having done investments they need to do later, partially be due to do something even better?
So as I think I understand your question is, how do we get folks to do deeper retrofits from the beginning, or is that what you're asking?
Well, so that people get some certainty that what they either do is good for a longer term.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like in some sense, you need a longer term plan.
Yeah, great question. So we have a couple different things that we're thinking about. One, we're thinking about how we can incentivize early compliance. And some of the things that we've been thinking about are, can we say to someone in the first step compliance cycle, if you're willing to make a commitment to reduce your energy usage, and then you show us that you've reduced your energy usage by 35%, 40%, we can tell you that you're okay for the next 2 cycles rather than having to have all this anxiety or that in 5 years you're going to have to redo all of these things. We're also thinking about ways that we can incentivize certain things like electrification that may be very costly right now or may actually make your EUI worse in terms of switching out, but we eventually, electrification is a big piece of clean energy DC. So that's another thing that we're thinking about, how can we incentivize these longer-term methods that are going to be beneficial in the long run. So those are sort of the things that we're thinking through right now. As we draft the rules, I imagine a lot of these details will come out in the rules and the conversations we have with the task force members. But if you have suggestions, we're also happy to hear that as well. Our information is up here on the slide, and as Jamie said, I think we need to move on so that I don't take up the entire agenda. So if there's any further questions, you can send them to us here, or you can ask at the end of the whole presentation.
Thank you, Katie. Well, staying on buildings, we'll now move to the building codes, and I would like to invite Casey, who's our green building expert.
Thanks. I can keep this brief unless there are specific questions. Happy to talk about the building code, sort of a very brief snapshot of where we are now and then where we anticipate heading. The codes are not a light read, and they're very technical, so those who are into codes understand codes, and the rest of us have not necessarily paid a lot of attention. But I think the real, sort of driving mantra is that I think the codes will become increasingly important and increasingly a bigger part of this conversation as we talk about building efficiency. The good thing about codes is they're an incredibly nuanced tool addressing buildings at various levels of construction project, and they set a solid minimum floor for what is built, either new or major renovation in the district. So we're increasingly seeing codes as no longer just a simple fire and life safety tool, but really a way to start talking about energy efficiency, green construction, perhaps resiliency. I think it becomes an important tool in the toolkit when we're talking about sustainability, carbon emissions, and the future for the district. So 2013 introduced the Green Construction Code in the district for the first time. It required that all projects above 10,000 square feet address green building in some minimum way. And 2013 was the prior sort of update to the code cycle, and since then we have been working on a revision to the entire suite of the building codes. Those are underway now. We anticipate that they will be adopted in February 2020. So there is an update coming soon, and again, that touches on plumbing, fire, electrical, all of the code topics. I think the larger change is coming to the Energy Conservation Code, and we see 23% improvement in energy efficiency coming out of that. So again, it's a strong step towards our goals, improving the energy efficiency in new construction and major renovation. And it introduces Appendix Z, which is really a minor footnote in this code update, but what I think it does is it teases what our future vision for a net zero energy code could look like, provides some definitions on how we're treating on-site renewables versus off-site renewables. Do we require a minimum energy efficiency on the building before you can then go purchase off-site renewables? Some of the details that I think really matter as we start to talk about what net zero looks like in the district. So they are available through the DC Register. The language is out there. It's not easy to find. If anyone's interested in the specifics, I'm happy to send a draft over. And as I mentioned, we hope to have the entire suite before City Council soon, and then hopefully adopted roughly February next year. And then there will, once the codes are adopted, we will have a fairly robust outreach and education roadshow. So stay tuned. There will be plenty of opportunities to kind of learn about what's new for those of you who this impacts your day-to-day work. And then talking about where we're heading next, the Clean Energy DC plan lays out some goals for requiring net zero energy in the building codes with low-rise residential construction being required to reach net zero in 2022, and all new construction and major renovation in 2026. And so as this update to the code cycle is hopefully being approved and adopted, we will be switching gears to discussing and developing that 2022 code very shortly. So there will be a call for public input and comments, and a fair amount of work behind the scenes in starting to develop what that language looks like and what the sort of step-down path towards net zero looks like for the district. Very brief nutshell. Any questions on codes?
So that picture there brings up a great question. It appears that the entire building is canopied with solar panels. So considering that you only have so much roof area that you can lay panels on, is the district dealing with the federal government about height limitations with respect to doing something like that?
Not in this context, no. I know that the height limit has been a topic of discussion within the past several years here in the district. At this point, it is not, but I think that it certainly will need to be perhaps a topic of conversation as we go forward.
So we're going to get roof area to do something sustainable or something substantial.
And also interesting to note, this project, which is the American Geophysical Union, the solar also hangs over the property line out into public space, also challenging from a zoning perspective, but really instrumental in making it work. So I think that's even another piece to layer onto that conversation. We are working broadly, working with our colleagues at the Office of Planning to think through the zoning code in a number of ways and where there will be potential challenges: height, treatment of penthouses, treatment of solar panels, public space. So trying to get ahead of that, recognizing that there will be sort of increasing challenges. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'll invite Thomas to come up and give an overview of what's going on in clean energy, regard to supply. And finally, I'll say at the end of this presentation is all the names of the presenters and their email addresses. So this is one meeting, but we can consider it an ongoing dialogue. So, you know, if you go home and say, oh, I wish I'd asked that, just email us and we're happy to talk.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to give an update regarding the renewable standard and the solar carve-out. So the Public Service Commission is the entity that enforces the RPS and the solar carve-out. According to the annual report from May 2019, the certified solar capacity of the district was 88.4 megawatts, which is below the 97.5 needed to meet the 1.15% solar requirement. So in the comparable numbers for 2019 are 1.85% and 155 megawatts. So DOEE supports meeting the RPS through its Solar for All program and also through our efforts to address barriers to installing solar in the district. We are looking to do that by, as Jamie earlier noted, addressing equity issues as well. So we're targeting low-end, moderate-income residents with our Solar for All program. Through the DCSU, we've installed 4 megawatts of community renewable energy facility capacity so far in 2019, and we have another 3 that we think is going to come online before the end of the year. That's through a total of 84 CREP projects. They're going to serve around 2,000 qualified households. In addition, we expect the Oxen Run project to come online in the first 3 months of 2020, which will serve another 750 district residents. We are currently doing outreach to sign up district residents for solar. We have around 700 subscribers for our CREP projects right now. So we're doing a targeted mail campaign to LIHEAP beneficiaries. We're meeting folks at DC government service centers. We're doing outreach at CREP sites and in communities near Oxen Run. And so if you have any questions about that, as Jamie said, my contact information will be on the board. In FY19, we had, with Solar for All, we had 7 megawatts installed, providing solar benefits to 8,000 households, and those benefits will last for 15 years. Finally, I'll note that we're going to be publishing a lessons learned document soon to talk about addressing barriers to solar in the district, some of the ones that you mentioned. Some of the key ones we've identified so far are access to solar sites, competitions for roof space, attracting customers for our Solar for All program, low-income customers, and providing benefits for solar for folks who don't have a utility bill. Any questions about that?
Have you taken a look at the draft sustainability guidelines from the Historic Preservation Review Board with an eye to whether those go far enough to enable placement of solar on core roofs in DC?
Yes. So we were consulted in that process. I think we think it meets the main needs that we see right now. I think it's probably going to be an ongoing discussion, but I think it addresses a lot of the key issues. Any other questions?
Any questions on the not podcast, but the webinar?
If not,
What is the financial low and moderate households?
so it's free for, if you qualify based on your income, which is around 80% of the area median income, it's free. So that's the incentive, so it's free.
And why do you think there's a challenge reaching customers if it's almost free?
There's two key challenges. So any government program that is targeted, which means it's not universal, it's targeted at a given community, requires reaching out to that community. People aren't just going to come to you necessarily. You have to do outreach to them. So that's one barrier. The second key barrier is that people think it's a scam or it's fraud. Like they don't trust it. Like free, you get offered free stuff all the time. You know, like hey, you want a cruise? Like all that kind of stuff. You know, so that is an additional barrier to overcome. Is building trust. It's a new program. It's not an established program. So getting the knowledge out there, having, you know, that kind of building that human relationship is all part of the barrier. And we welcome anybody who's interested in helping spread the word or helping us do outreach. We welcome that. And my contact information will be up there. So we need all the help we can get. So, any other questions? Yeah. Yes, you.
Could you give a general overview of payback period for residential solar and commercial solar?
The payback period? You mean like how long it would take someone to?
like you invest in solar, after 5 years, make your money back?
I don't know. I mean, I think it would depend on the installers. Maybe, I don't know, some of my colleagues who are a little more versed in residential solar want to speak up, but I think generally speaking, the district's incentives are some of the most generous in the country. I mean, I can speak for myself. I've gotten quotes that have like a 5-year payback period. You want that?
Generally, our experience has been under 4 years, well under 4 years, simple payback.
And DC's incentives, I think, are the most generous in the country by a big margin, like more than twice the second most generous.
Yep. And those come from the Renewable Portfolio Standard that has just been extended. So I think the anticipated future of those, the value of those renewable energy credits has a solid price floor. So I think we anticipate the future being more of the same.
Any other questions from folks?
I have a quick question. So the Clean Energy DC Act establishes the 100% renewable electricity portfolio standard, but it's enforced by the Public Service Commission.
Yes.
So the solar for all, we're trying to achieve the solar carve out and provide affordable energy, but a lot of it's managed by the PSC, is that right?
Yeah, the PSC manages compliance. They collect the payments if folks don't meet the requirement. So they are very much the enforcement arm of this requirement. We try to support, try to provide the incentives for it, but they're kind of the stick on this.
Hey guys, this is Mike upstairs. If you don't mind moving forward, if you could just quickly summarize or repeat the questions that are being asked. We're having a tough time hearing them up here. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Thanks, Thomas. So now I'm going to invite Edward Yim, who's our energy advisor, to give a presentation on the strategic electrification roadmap. So this is included in the Clean Energy DC plan. It's not in the Act, so it's not law, but it's very interesting and it will be very impactful moving forward on how our energy infrastructure develops.
Good afternoon. I'll be brief. As Jamie mentioned, this is a supplement to the Clean Energy DC plan. It is a technical study that looks at how we can most cost-effectively electrify our buildings and transportation out through 2032. So the reason why we're doing this, the main reason is that the on-site use of fuel oil and natural gas represents about at least 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions liability. So, and for that reason, generally the international community has recognized electrification and fuel switching as one of the 3 main pillars of deep decarbonization. So the DC, again, the Clean Energy DC plan calls for doing this technical study as an action item. The main objective, as I mentioned, is how do we electrify cost effectively and minimize the impact to the electric grid. And second objective will be sort of a subset of that is how do we use or really take the most advantage of energy efficiency, demand response, and customer-owned generation to do that. So we have a lot of good people helping us. We have a team of 5 consultant organizations in collaboration with PEPCO, so thanks to PEPCO. And it is funded by US DOE. The study will last about 16 months or so. We just got underway a couple of months ago. It has 5 discrete tasks. The first task is really the modeling the electrification scenario for the buildings. Second task is doing the same for the transportation or the travel demand in the city. Third task is modeling the greenhouse gas intensity at an hourly level of our electric grid. The fourth task is then looking at the grid assessment at a neighborhood level. How much room do we have to absorb new electric demand? And then the fifth is then looking at what are some mitigation measures that are clean, cost-effective, that harnesses the innovation in the energy sector, that largely empowers customers and businesses. We expect some preliminary results from the building and transportation sectors in the first quarter of next year. And at that time, we will reach out to interested persons and key institutional stakeholders to give them an update.
How's that going to work, right?
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions for Edward?
He couldn't. The way he had it mounted, he couldn't.
And as we get going in this, I think we're looking at a pilot, and I believe, and I'll ask Lance if he can share, the DCSEU is going to be looking at electrifying or electrification of households, so switching over, making them more efficient, and then switching over to solar or clean energy.
Definitely. Thanks, Jamie. With regard to the pilot Jamie's mentioning, the DCSU is in the process of developing a pilot for single-family homes that we call it a decarbonization pilot. Within this program of itself, the intent is to really focus on those homes that are using oil or natural gas, moving them from those central heating systems to electric heat pumps, combining with weatherization of the homes, and ultimately installing solar panels on the roof. So we will be leveraging a number of other funding sources. For example, the Solar for All program will pay for the solar installation on the single-family homes. It's a very small pilot. About 15 to 20 homes right now is being considered because there are a number of ancillary pieces that are going to be required to be done in those homes, especially when you transition in from one fuel source to the next in terms of going from natural gas to heat pumps, or even from, oil tank to installing heat pumps, and taking care of all of the work associated with installing those measures to make sure they function properly. Funding for this initiative is coming from the 30% additional revenue set aside that is specified in the Clean Energy DC Act to help improve the energy efficiency of low-income housing. The intent here is really to develop a number of case studies to determine if this can be something that can be done on a much broader scale to help us achieve the district's long-term climate change goals. Any questions? Yes.
So you mentioned a couple of features of single-family housing and energy use, but I'm kind of curious because of building performance. You sealed the whole house. Is there anything for indoor air quality and moisture issues that usually comes from that?
Yes, that's a part of the weatherization initiative. When they're doing what we call blower-door guided air sealing, it's to ensure that you still maintain proper air quality in the house and you're not making the house too tight, a term that we use in the energy field, so that it's still comfortable for those in the home, and making sure that we're putting in the right amount of heating into the space that we're removing the gas systems from, or even the oil-fired systems from.
Hey, we've got a question up here, upstairs. If you want to.
All right. Let's hear it, Mike.
For the building part, on the first bullet for the tax, it says especially residential buildings. Does that mean single family and low-rise multifamily, or can you define what the residential piece is?
Yeah, let me.
Is this the electrification, or is this related to the pilot program?
Yeah, let me hold your question while we bring our other presenter up, and if there was another one in the room. Okay. Did you hear the question?
No, actually,
Do you mind repeating the question?
So it was specific, sorry, we're making this a little choppy here, it's my fault, specific to the first task, under details, the 5 tasks. The first one, what is residential buildings, right? Is that multifamily units? How are you operationalizing that, I guess?
Yeah.
What's the definition?
The building component of the analysis will include the residential buildings, both single detached homes and multifamily units. We simply call that out because generally, as a class of buildings, residential buildings tend to use more natural gas for heating and heating water than commercial buildings. So we have done some more extensive preliminary analysis on the residential building side for the air source heat pump uptake potential, and so we just called that out for that reason. Residential building represents a huge portion of the overall natural gas demand in the district. So decarbonizing that portion, the residential building sector, is critical for us to meet our goal.
Thank you, Edward.
You have a question?
Yeah, so let's say you're going to do a residential, and cut down to a residential three-story building. A developer might just want to be really focused on profitability and margin and, just to be fair, get to their maximum profitability, meet the code, invest in curb appeal items. What information's out there? Because I'm perceiving I've got to cast a wide net and gather all this information about all these different incentives, and time is money. I may not go there. So is there a concierge at DCRA level that can say, hey, time out, before you go with a minimum HVAC, or you stick with gas, I can commingle all these incentives, and I might still hit my profitability and margin numbers, but doing something that's meeting the district goals. Is there someone who can hold my hand in that process?
Yeah, the DCSU can, and I say the DCSU because most of the work, the programs that we do internally here at the agency are primarily low-income focused. If you're moving beyond that low-income space, then the DCSU will certainly be able to provide that technical assistance and the incentives necessary to help you make the right decisions.
Thank you.
And I just want to add that I think eventually, the high-performance building hub is going to be sort of trying to work in that space as well as offering some sort of central location where you can go to find out where the resources are to get access to the incentives, get access to the technical assistance and things like that.
Because there are multiple agencies that be touching, probably, right? Multiple programs.
Right. And
that doesn't sound like fun.
Well, we have absolutely.
We're really fun.
We have recognized that. So in Clean Energy DC plan, one of the recommended action items that with the high performance building hub comes out of is to create this one-stop shop concierge service for buildings.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this before we move to transportation? Okay, good. Thank you, Lance. I'd like to invite Eric. He's our transportation expert and
Well, he's right.
bike mechanic. He knows the whole thing. So.
That's true. Hopefully some of you guys, assuming you're all of us here are environmentalists, and you guys did decide to bike over here and really walk the walk, and you ran into any bike trouble along the way, I'll be more than happy to grab my tools from upstairs and help you out. All right, once again, my name is Eric Campbell, and I am a program analyst here at DOEE, and I've been working on transportation electrification. What I want to talk to you about is about 20% of the importance as the building stuff, which is coincidentally also 20%, also transportation represents about 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we need to try to, provide or obscure by some ways in order to reach our true carbon neutrality goals. Now, first I want to talk about the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act. Now, for those of you folks who do know the Act pretty well, you'll know that it starts on Title V, which is on page 14 of the around 10 double-sided information. So, the Act in general covers, that DOE is helping out, covers three important areas. The first one is the development of an excise tax. Now, this excise tax is to help manage and abate any, to develop with coordination of DMV to abate any of the excise tax that you are paying on a vehicle if it meets a certain type of fuel standard. That is currently in development right now. We are hoping within the next year to have something to push forward so we can start to implement it. That's Section 501 of Title V. Section 502 is the Mayor's TE program. Now, the Mayor's TE program looks at how are we going to be shifting all of our public buses as well as private fleet vehicles or 50 passenger vehicles or more, including limos and taxis, to be 50% of those to be zero emissions by 2030, and 100% of them to be by year 20,450. For some of you know this is actually the plan for when we colonize Titan, but that should be 2050. My apologies on that. Now, this is actually a scaled-up program, so we'll the program will be 50% by 2030, 75% by 2035, 90% by 2040, and 100% by 2045. Let's see. And okay, so that's for the Mayor's TE program. Once again, this looks at buses and public fleets, buses and private fleets. Excuse me.
Next slide.
What?
Next slide.
No, not yet. We have one more, and the third one is actually the Clean Vehicle Transition Plan. Now, the transition plan actually helps us establish what are the strategies, the policies.
The difference between him and Dan Trumanacre up at.
Do you mind muting it if you're on the conference line, please?
He's as good as they get. He's as good as I've ever seen. He's remembering stuff like.
So anyway, I really do appreciate feedback along the process, but I would appreciate if you could hold questions till the end, or comment, or kind remarks even. Okay, and then Section 503, which is the Clean Vehicle Transition Program, looks at how are we going to have the strategy, timeline, cost, and any sort of policies that we need to have developed in order to be 25%, in order to get 25% zero-emission vehicle registration by 2030. So what we mean by zero-emission vehicle registration is this includes all types of vehicles across the board. So your mom and pop's car, my car, which I just sold because I'm now bike friendly because I like to walk the walk here at DOEE, or any other vehicle. This also has a stipulation for us to work specifically with OSSE, the Office of the State School Superintendent of Education, to make sure that 100% of the replacement public buses or school buses will also be electric by their replacement lifetime by 2021. Okay, so I just went over a lot of very complex questions. Did I lose anyone upon the way so far? Before we go on to the next slide.
When did you say the vehicle excise tax would be?
So it is still in development right now. We are working with the Department of Motor Vehicles in order to make sure. So we are providing them with the technical assistance on how we are going to be, how the best way to be implemented, since we have some exceptionally smart and bright people, both in this room and in the rest of the building, who are helping us develop this.
So the bill says January.
Bill does say January 1st, yes. So
probably not going to be done by then.
Yeah, as someone said, predicting the future is a very difficult thing to do, but we are going to do our best to try to meet those deadlines. Yeah.
And we're trying to develop a effective excise tax that does what we want it to do, rather than just say this is the deadline, let's get something in. So we're working on a proposal that will really help hit the carbon aspect of it, and so it might take a little more time.
So this overall just kind of represents how we want to be able to get to where we're going to go in order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. But I haven't talked about any things that we are currently doing right now, which I would love to elaborate on. And that's on the next slide, which is here. Great. So I do want to talk a little bit about the American Climate Cities Challenge, or ACCC. Some of this might sound familiar to some of you, but this might be new. The ACCC is a 2-year program in which we have identified some moonshot programs or policies or projects and objectives that we want to do, which addresses greenhouse gas reduction in the transportation sector. It also does areas, not just ones that we're working here at DOE, but also does areas of building, which you've heard about earlier. But I just, once again, want to focus more on the transportation side. So what this challenge does is it gives us about 2 years of technical assistance from various different partners, such as Electrification Coalition, boards, and others as well. And what they're helping us do is like, okay, we have these plans, we know where we want to go, what are some of the filling gaps that we need to do? Now, the district government has been very forthright, very forward-thinking in terms of we want to replace as many of our light-duty sedans of our fleet, currently around 600. And right now we have about 150 of those are either plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, PHEVs, or battery electric vehicles, BEVs. So, once again, we want to make sure we're walking the walk as we go forward. But so what we're asking people, and what we have learned about what other cities have done, is what is the best type of strategic replacement plan that we can do for our own individualized fleet. And so what we've been doing with our partners is not only identify the best vehicles that we can switch over to electric options, but also kind of how do we train folks in order to use them. There's nothing worse than trying to implement a new technology without the right type of education to go along with it. That's one of the aspects that we're getting to for you. We're also looking at for some guidance resources for the program and fleet managers. Once again, the people who are actually driving these vehicles. This is something. So once again, we're making sure that we have local champions that are involved with the process to make sure that as we start to electrify or change our fleet types of vehicles, we actually have people who are on the ground and understand what the process is, or just some people say, this is the new toy, I don't really care for it. We want to make sure that, that we're not just putting the technology in people's hands, but they actually know how to use it as well. And finally, one thing, in order, as people know, for any, trying to get people to enjoy new technology and actually educate them, we're also developing a whole new mobile showcase option. This is for us, not just me, but for anyone who learns this, to be able to go out and talk about these vehicles and to explain how the vehicles are used, what our plans are, and just to see on how electrification can work for folks in the community.
He can only shoot a buck.
Covers a little bit. We are currently in the process of this right now. Many of these plans will hopefully are going to be implemented in many of these plans and programs are going to be implemented in 2020. So if you're at the Washington Auto Show, you might see me giving a whole new spiel about this by then, which is on January 25th. Coincidentally, my birthday as well. You can sing happy birthday to me there. Thank you very much. That's it. Can I take the first question?
Here will be a ton of bones. Throw them in that big. I got an 18 gallon.
Well, I like his red tie first. I'm going to go with him.
I just have a question about as the city electrifies with respect to transportation.
I don't think they butcher though.
Having charging stations, is that going to be a specific requirement of the district that building owners install a specific or prescribed number of charging stations? As that happens, because we know it's coming, is it expected that building owners absorb that cost of charging people's cars, in essence, gas?
Thank you for your question. The question relates to how we're building be able to handle the electrification transitions with regards to the fueling aspect. So I think the point of reference I would probably make is our building's going to become fueling stations instead of gas stations. So hopefully they're not going to be selling that. We do have a few of the building codes that are being updated right now for building owners who will voluntarily decide to install electric options. We do also encourage the aspect that building actually shows these as an amenity versus as a requirement. Because as I think Casey meant, I can't remember if you mentioned it in the update in the district building energy code.
You can go. In fact, I'll sit you in the tree stand.
Hey guys on the phone, do you mind muting it? This might be Mike in 709.
Get it. Well, it's a little late for that one. It's probably eaten by now.
Calling Mike Matthews. Please mute your phone. Thank you.
So we were trying. Hello.
When it comes to charge to ownership and operations of any sort of charging station individually, we are actually taking a very hands-off approach on it. With regards to whether buildings are required to own or operate any of these types of fueling stations within their building, a lot of that is actually being addressed in both the public filing cases right now, as well as updating our district building energy codes as well. Those are open and common processes right now. So I can't really give you a full answer on that right now, but I'll be happy to follow up more offline.
That thing, you can probably shoot.
I sense a follow-up.
As a suggestion, if and when, so I don't think it's a matter of if, but when this does evolve, that we have all these charging stations in our garages, because we're not going to be taking garages out, there should be some consideration to backing that out of any that power that's used to charge vehicles out of people's Energy Star stores.
Okay. That's actually also duly noted as well. And so during any of the open comment periods, actually would be useful information to make sure it's put into the open filing. And
I would cite it in.
Yeah, typically,
this is what I do. I cite it in
already
story.
Most folks sort of have their garages submetered, and you can exclude your
parking. You get in like a pattern like that you're
benchmarking. If it is submetered, you can just sort of exclude that from the benchmarking, so it shouldn't play a part in terms of Energy Star score. But in terms of consuming energy, that's another question.
That goes to the lighting.
Shit. They're all one.
Yeah. So EPA has that
still
I've never seen figuring that out. You can always contact us, but yeah, typically we find that if you saw now and you can
if you my stand there's
Mr. Yim.
Yeah, I mean, if I need to supplement Eric and the city cancer on some
so that's from a tree stand, and then we go down to two other spots where we other hunting areas that I can
very thoughtful about how we
set something there. I must have seen. I mean, I was thinking.
Man in the back.
saw other there, but not in range.
So probably one thing I should have mentioned when I started up here is I am super hard of hearing, so if anyone is closer to the front would be able to repeat that question for me, please.
The
company in Bowie that sells EV stations that use credit cards, so that people that are not living in the building are not going to be charging their vehicles there.
Okay.
And the building takes it.
So if you're shooting short down, you're
thank
going
you.
right over it.
Eric, it's Mike upstairs. We do have a couple questions.
I'll get to you, Mike.
Essentially reselling electricity if they charge for that service? Is there anything in the PEPCO rules or anything in the district rules that would prohibit or regulate what the charges are for the electricity that the chargers are reselling?
So the question had to do with, is there anything within the rules about reselling electricity?
Right.
So right now, a lot of that is actually up in the most recent PEPCO filing, or in front of the PSCs, which is kind of an open comment right now. And I actually don't have a full answer for that because that is currently being limited. Unless, Alex, did I miss anything in that?
I freaking busted balls forever for that. All crossroads do.
Oh, they're not.
They all have scopes.
It's not like the one.
If you have any further questions, I'll be happy to discuss this more afterwards. I don't know if you really got a complete answer there.
Eric, can we go to Mike Matthews? And I have to apologize to Mike. It was not his room with the background noise. It was Mr. Herr. So my apologies. And go ahead, Mike.
That's okay. We've got a good crew up here. Everybody took it pretty well. So we have a couple different questions if you'd like to go first.
Hi. When I bought my Leaf 6 years ago, I had a waiver on the excise tax, which I believe is also called a sales tax. Am I right on that? The question is, what levels, could you talk to us a little bit about the design considerations for the excise tax levels tailored to the potential buyers concerned? But maybe a quick way to address this is by saying what other jurisdictions have done this successfully and lessons learned. It just needs a couple of sentences, since I'm not expecting it.
Yeah, I'm actually going to bring up Mr. Alex Lopez, who's been taking lead on this, and he can answer some of these specific questions. If you are interested about the direct language in the vehicle excise tax section, it's in Title V, Section 501 of the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act, which gives out the exact language. I'm going to let Mr. Lopez actually further answer that question.
Yeah, so as Eric mentioned, DOEE is working alongside DMV to develop the framework for the excise tax as prescribed by the Omnibus Act. The Omnibus Act, so currently vehicles with over 40 miles per gallon are exempted from the excise tax. The Omnibus changes this exemption to only cover electric vehicles. So that if you own an electric vehicle, you'll continue to be exempted, but if you have a high-efficiency hybrid, you won't under the new rules that are in development.
Thank you.
And thank you. We have one more question we'd like to get in here if possible. Oh, you're good? Nobody else? Okay, so that's it for up here.
Okay, we can come back to this. We're going to move to the carbon neutrality plan, and then if we want, we can come back to the excise tax stuff. Thank you, transportation team. Guys, let me welcome Jen Hatch. She's going to present on the carbon neutrality strategy.
I hate to be the last thing between you and all your burning questions in the door, but here I go. Obviously, there is a ton that all the groups here are doing in the immediate term, but I wanted to just make a quick plug for what we are doing to look beyond 2032. Many of you might already be familiar with the fact that the mayor has committed to becoming, for the district, to become carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2050. More pertinent to my timeline down here, she's also committed to releasing our strategy for how we achieve carbon neutrality by the end of 2020. So 12 months from now, you should see our published strategy for our theory of how we're going to get there. For those who are now everyone's well familiar with Clean Energy DC. The ways in which the carbon neutrality strategy is different is we have a different target. We're aiming for 0. We're looking at the same buildings, energy supply, transportation, but we're adding waste and wastewater. So that's a new addition. We're looking at climate mitigation, but also adaptation and resilience together, finding ways where they work hand in hand, and finding ways that they might have some conflicts. And also looking that in 2050, even if we stopped doing all the polluting that we're doing right now, our climate will look different in 2050. So we are taking into account a changing climate in 2050 when I will hopefully be almost retired. So just a couple heads ups for folks who are interested in being part of this journey with us, which we hope many of you will. Over the next year, we plan to take our show on the road. We've done some really initial technical modeling to look at what's possible in the district, what should we be shooting for, what level of reduction is possible. We will not get to 0 on our but how far can we get, and then what's that last little piece, and what can we do regionally or beyond that to get there. So we plan to do a bunch of stakeholder engagement really to help us figure out, we know what the big shifts are that we need to make. Many of them are in Clean Energy DC. I would make a plug for the importance of BEPS that Katie spoke to and the codes that Casey spoke to being a really critical part of the buildings component. But there's equal big parts on the transportation and energy side too. So really helping us think through if we kind of know where we need to be in 2050, what are the policies and the strategies that we need in place to get there, and then what timeline. So we'll be looking to come out to various groups to have folks back in this room to talk with us. So I just put a plug if carbon neutrality excites you, interests you, or you want to be part of that discussion. I have my contact information, I think, on the next slide. And please don't be a stranger because we could really use your help over the next 12 months.
Thank you. Thank you.
Questions? Great. Neutrality. Got it.
No questions. Yeah. Well, I hope this helps put everything in perspective and you see, where we're trying to go in 2032 and then where we're going after that. But we still have some time, and so I want to open it up. If you guys have any specific questions, general thoughts, we'd be happy to hear from you. I'll go with you because I cut you off earlier.
Thank you. So I got the impression that with the excise tax, what's planned is to drop the exemption from the tax to, make that apply only for electric vehicles. But of course, something else you could do is just make the level of the excise tax depend, increasingly on for very fuel inefficient cars. Apparently that's not planned, and so if that's right, why not?
That is planned. I didn't fully discuss all the details of the excise tax, but the main thrust of the tax is to develop, as dictated by the Act, is to develop a tax that is where the tax rate goes up and down based on the fuel economy of the car. So that is what we're doing.
And since we're getting close to January, anything a little bit more specific? I mean, that was in the Act, right? So that much we sort of knew, or.
So I'm afraid that we're not ready to share details, but we are trying to put together an excise tax regime that will help us achieve our clean energy goals in the transportation sector. So it will be based on the vehicle fuel economy. There will be some exemptions. As I mentioned, there will be an exemption for electric vehicles. There will also be an exemption, not an exemption, but for district residents claiming the district earned income tax credit, they will be able to claim a flat excise tax rather than the excise tax that's radiated on
Right, and so it's in the bill it said it was carbon neutral, and that really restricted
Revenue neutral.
revenue neutral. Sorry, that restricted the incentives and how it looks. So we're hoping we can change that and then restructure it, but we need to go through our internal approval processes. So that's sort of the issue we're having.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. You haven't mentioned what's going on with any of DC's buildings.
Yeah.
So what is going on with both existing buildings, A and B? Are new buildings, currently under design, under consideration, being looked at for net zero?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. I used to work at Department of General Services before I came over to DOE. And so the bill, the Clean Energy DC Act, says Department of General Services has to create a strategic energy management plan for how they're going to reduce their own emissions and energy use. And it sets benchmarks for deep energy retrofits and net zero retrofits. So right now they're looking at developing this plan. So I think they'll bring a consultant on and develop a public plan on how they're going to go about doing this. And it will include retrofits and probably some new construction. I know there's at least one public elementary, middle school right now that they're trying to make net zero, and that they're looking at others, but they're sort of just getting into it now. But they're supposed to lead by example, and they're getting funding to do it and should have a plan out by the end of this fiscal year.
I have a question for Katie. For the BEPS program, I just want to go over a timeline real quick. Sure. The BEPS rules will be out for public comment. When exactly? When are you forecasting?
Yeah, so the question was asking when the BEPS rules will be out for public comment. So we're going to work really hard to get them out next summer, the summer of 2020. And then once they are out, there will be a 30-day public comment, at least one 30-day public comment period. And then hopefully having the final rules published sort of late next year, so late 2020.
Okay, and the first cycle will start off with 2020 data, like the 2020 median?
No, so the first, sorry, do you mean the first standard?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question was the first standard that we set will be based off calendar year 2020 data. The answer is no. The first standard that we set will be based off of calendar year 2019 data because we will not have the 2020 data at the time that we have to set the standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, that's a question. Are we live? Okay.
Is that a follow-up question or a new question?
Just to a BEPS question.
Okay, we'll go to you and then.
When will the building owners be required to get the independent third-party certification of their Energy Star data?
Yeah, so the question is, so the law also mandates that the Energy Star data that is submitted to the district, which currently will and still will be, is self-reported data. So the law mandates that that data has to be verified by a third party. So the law doesn't specify a date, but I'll be transparent in that we're trying to work and make sure, and we're trying to work right now to write rules so that the 2019 data has to be verified. So we're working on that. The rule, we haven't actually drafted the rules or put them out for comment or anything like that, but we are working on that. So best case scenario for us, the 2019 data will need to be verified, and as you can imagine, the reason that we're really looking to do that is because we want our standard to be based on verified data. So we're hoping that first time we set that standard, and then that every, the years that we do it after will be based on verified data.
And the 29 data is due?
The 2019 data is due April 1st, 2020.
Thank you. Yeah.
My question is for Jen. You have a carbon neutrality and a climate resilient goal. How are you defining climate resilience?
Great. We have a whole climate ready DC plan. So I think it's acknowledging what we're expecting. Melissa, my coworker, likes to say warmer, wetter, wilder, which is a bit of a tongue twister. So I think we're as far as the neutrality strategy goes, it is basically integrating the adaptation plan we already have, making sure that lives and breathes within the carbon neutrality strategy. There are certain things around backup power and things like that that we have to, those are where the tensions come in. I think some cities have a carbon mitigation plan and not an adaptation plan. We are fortunate to already have a starting place for both. And so our carbon neutrality strategy won't duplicate Climate Ready DC, but rather draw the linkages between the two and the importance of doing them together, if that makes sense. Great.
We don't have a shortage of plans. I think that's the takeaway. But I promise you, they're not redundant. You know, they support one another. Mike, do you have any questions? Yeah.
Sorry, we've got a couple questions upstairs here.
Go ahead.
My question was the one he asked.
Okay. Anybody else? So I lied again. No questions up here.
That's okay. We got questions in here. We can go to some questions.
Okay.
Last line, the Omnibus Act says that there's a fiscal impact statement attached. Is that done, and is there someone that can provide sort of executive summary of what the conclusions of that fiscal impact statement?
I have an answer for you, but let me actually pass you to an expert, which is, I think that's being done right now, but.
What was the question?
Sorry, the question is, the last line of the omnibus bill mentioned that there needs to be a fiscal impact statement, and so the question is, was that completed?
On the website, we provide where it provides a breakdown to show how each of the titles will be funded.
Yeah.
More executive summary of what is the overall impact going to be. As the building owners, we're very concerned that the way we're going to get to reductions by all of our customers.
Yeah, that's different from the FIT that you're referencing. So
The fiscal impact statement only is the impact of the city. I got it. Yeah, I understand that. I'm curious to know from the city's perspective, what is the impact going to be? And then yes, I'd like to raise the flip side of that question. As building owners, we don't want to meet these reduction targets by having all of our customers go to Virginia or to Maryland because the rents that we're going to have to achieve to accomplish this and to avoid, these penalties, they're unknown. I don't know what to do. We've got typically a 5-year planning horizon, and you're talking about the end of next year, maybe before we have some idea of what those penalties are going to be. So in addition to what we're trying to do to plan or come up with alternative operating strategies or technologies, or what we need to invest on the capital side, what do we need to do to avoid this? We need to be educating our owners now as to what the expectations should be. This is in the next 5-year horizon is when these things are going to kick in. So we're already here, and we don't know what to put down, and we don't know what the effect is going to be on our customer base. Many of whom are associations, and they live on a budget. And we're very concerned that people are going to look for alternatives. And we're going to be making these wonderful improvements and these trying to meet these worthy challenges, and our customer base is not going to be there with us. May not be with us.
Yeah. It's a great question. So basically the question is asking sort of what is DOE doing to address potentially, or the district, what are we doing to potentially address the costs that might come with these mandates? That's basically the gist of the question. We don't want you moving out of the district either. So the Act calls for, in terms of the Building Energy Performance Standard specifically, the Act calls for DOE to produce a study, a third-party study. We're going to engage a third-party entity that will do a comprehensive study to sort of see what are going to be the costs and the benefits of the Building Energy Performance Standard. We are working on that right now, and we are thinking about sort of strategizing about how we should do that, how we should frame that, and it'll be completed by the end of, September of next year, so the end of the fiscal year. However, to address sort of the overall question of, how are building owners going to pay for this and things like that, and what are the penalties going to be, again, all these task force meetings are going to be open to the public, so you can start to get a sense of where we're leaning in terms of the fines and things like that before the rules even come out. And we'll be working on this study that we'll be talking about potentially in those public meetings, so we can start talking through those things. We've done a little bit of preliminary analysis last year, basically, and, we did sort of do some preliminary analysis, sort of macro scale costs and things like that, and one of the things that, we found in our data that we thought was pretty, astounding is that the median payback on a lot of these things is modeled to be 3 years. And so I know that doesn't do a lot to talk to, like, the upfront costs that you might have to put forward with that, but we're also addressing that through sort of our innovative financing mechanisms, through the Green Bank, through the DCFCU rebates program. So we're really, really trying to work together to put all these things together so that we can help address that question, because it's a really important question, and it's a really important thing that we have to think about, because as Jamie mentioned, one of the biggest things that is, sort of a part of all of this is equity, and how can we make sure that this is, we are doing things that are in the best interest of all district residents, and making sure that everybody sort of has that level playing field, for lack of a better term, with all of these mandates that we know that we're coming out with. So we are working towards that, and we welcome any feedback or anything that anyone has to say about that. Again, my contact information is on there. My colleagues' contact information is on there. But those are some of the things that we're working to address that issue.
Thank you. Other questions? I think we got time for maybe one or two last questions. Or we can get out a couple minutes early. Okay, thank you guys. These are the contacts of everyone here. Some of us will hang around if you have any final questions.